Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Granite Mountain Movie Club. Today, we're going to be talking about The Apprentice from 2024. It's the film based on the rise of Donald Trump in the 70s and 80s. And today, I'm joined by DegreeStudies. How you doing, DegreeStudies?
Good. How are you? How's it going? Hi, everyone.
And then we've got a first-time guest who I've been talking to him forever. I've meant to have him on for over a year, but finally got him here. But we've got Obesegoth.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Obesegoth. I mean, I know you've got this famously private account. I know you've got tons of people trying to get at you. So some people might not know, they might not see your stuff because you're private, but you've got some knowledge about the entertainment industry. What are the kind of things you're interested in? What are the things you tweet about?
Yeah, the account, the waiting list is a couple hundred people long in the request, but sometimes you know what, if I like you on a space or something, I might let you skip the line. So I'd encourage everybody listening to request to follow. Yeah, I tweet about film industry stuff like box office, the awards race. I talk a lot about the Oscars and kind of predicting that and betting on it. And I also tweet about some, industry stuff. I tweet about, special effects and makeup in that kind of world. I tweet about various aspects of kind of filmmaking. And yeah, I try to go see everything that's out in theaters now. And kind of give a coverage of it.
Yeah, I like that you look at the Oscars. I mean, whenever I'm in a couple different like movie chats, if I bring up the Oscars, it's kind of just crickets because most there's a lot of guys like on Twitter who are kind of in my circles and stuff who they do love film, but they don't care about like the film industry. They don't care about like what's new or whatever. They just kind of want something cool to watch or whatever. So if I bring up the Oscars, they don't really care because just they're not interested in what's happening in the moment. And but I've always sort of been interested in the Oscars. Like I don't think who wins means it was actually good or the best or whatever. But it's always been interesting to me as just like as a cultural indicator, like telling us where people are at. Like there's some years where you just like know like this the winning movie probably has to be about gay people or probably has to have a certain number of black people in it or something. And it just tells us sort of things about, and then, if something that doesn't fit maybe current thing narratives is to win, like, well, that's a data point too. That tells us something interesting too about where people's heads are at.
Yeah, there's a lot of people kind of on our greater sphere of Twitter who are kind of into movies, but they tend to just have written off modern Hollywood entirely. Maybe they'll go see like a Robert Eggers movie or Ari Aster or something like that, but they've largely just checked out. And I think it's worth reporting on new stuff, even if you don't necessarily like all of it. But also, a point that I often kind of talk about is like it's probably not as bad as people think. And as you said, sometimes those data points are contrary to the kind of perception, especially among conservatives, of the Oscars. I mean, I think everybody just kind of assumes, the best picture winning movie would be, like the sort of most, kind of woke, kind of political thing there is, but that's really not the case. Like for example, that Emmett Till biopic, which was, kind of widely mocked by people around here, didn't even get any nominations. And the most recent two winners are, it's Oppenheimer, and then this year it looks like it's going to be either Anora or The Brutalist, both of which are fairly not diverse movies, and not really what you would consider traditionally kind of like woke as right wingers would think. And with Hollywood as a whole, I mean, if you look at the sort of up and coming A-list talent, it's like I mean, Glenn Powell and Jacob Elordi and Sydney Sweeney, and like this kind of thing. It's not the sort of like often um, mocked sort of Netflix casting. People hate share a lot, and I don't think that necessarily gives a fair or accurate view of the film industry. So I like to kind of I cover that stuff too, and obviously, like there is a lot of that sort of nonsense, some of which we're going to talk about today. But I try to give a fairly broad overview, and I try to watch movies that people in our sphere would probably not think to watch, or because it's not like the Northman or something.
Yeah, it's kind of there's like this reliable tweet format where people say something like, "Oh, I haven't watched a new movie since 2010 or something," and they get all these retweets and stuff, and everyone's patting each other on the back, and it's like, well, some actually pretty good stuff has come out in the last 5, 10 years. So let's get
Can I
into.
just
Oh
throw in
yeah,
a question about the Oscars, Granite?
yeah, sure.
Because I think I'm curious for your guys' perception on this. Because I still see a lot of new movies. But one thing that I think has happened to me with award shows in general, I'm just curious to get your guys' perspective on it. Is I don't think I have that like negative view that Hollywood can't produce good movies anymore. But I do feel like during my adult life, award shows have become less important to normies, which kind of made me enjoy them less. Like I have a perception of right when I started working, like the best picture especially would be sort of a topic of conversation in the office, and like that went away. And so I sort of stopped caring about the Oscars because it seemed like its impact as like a general cultural thing. There was not as much like I was always sort of drafting off the excitement of other people, like, oh, I'll watch this show because maybe at the office or my friends will want to talk about which movie they liked and what ended up winning. And like that, there stopped being as many people who were following it like that. And so I sort of dropped out of following award stuff as well. And
Yeah,
I'm curious if you think that's a real thing or just like happens to be my experience or
I think it is for sure. I mean, in the 90s or something, it seemed like if there was, they generally had what, 5 nominees for Best Picture. It seemed like an adult, kind of a normal middle class adult, would have gone to see like 2 to 4 of the 5 nominees. Like they would have seen them, like they would have known what they were and had like an opinion. And now they nominate what, up to like 10.
It was variable, but now they've locked it at 10.
Okay, so they nominate 10, and it's like a normal adult, middle class adult will have seen like one.
I mean, I've seen graphs like which basically confirm exactly what you guys are saying. Like if you look at Best Picture nominees, say in the 2000s, if you look at things like Return of the King, Gladiator, um, Slumdog Millionaire was a big hit. It was fairly there was a fairly close thing, and even movies which you wouldn't expect, things like A Beautiful Mind or whatever, um, did a lot better than you would think. Um, it mirrors part of a larger trend in Hollywood, and I do think that'd probably be worth devoting like an entire episode to like a Oscars industry space, where kind of the sort of mid budget big movie has kind of died, um, and there's been like a sort of divergence between, well, either now you have a 200 million blockbuster, or you have a $20 million or less thing, distributed by Searchlight or A24. And the kind of middle ground movies for, with budgets of 50 to 100 million with big name stars that are dramas or historical epics have really not done so well. And, there's been some big flops, which from recent years, things like Babylon, that David O. Russell movie with Margot Robbie in it. I'm forgetting the name. Napoleon. These kind of things have kind of bombed recently, but that's just a couple names of many. And that middle ground has kind of died out. Either you're playing to hardcore cinephiles or you're playing to the US and China both. Now, in recent years, usually one to two kind of blockbusters will get a nomination spot, something like Top Gun Maverick, or
Hmm.
this year it'll probably be Dune Part 2 and maybe Gladiator 2. Um, if you're like a good blockbuster, they'll let in one or two. But it's, again, yeah, it's largely fights between movies that have pretty limited budgets. And like this year, Nor and the Brutalist, their budgets are both under 10 million, and they're probably going to make, like, I don't know, 20, 30 million domestically or something at most. And yeah, so it's, the public has really kind of tuned out. I mean, you could say there's some elements of, like, people giving politicized speeches or something at award shows, but I think it's more just that the kind of movies which the Oscars used to award largely don't exist. An example of one that did exist was Oppenheimer, and it won Best Picture, but there's not that many Oppenheimers, and the few that are kind of in that vein tend to flop if they don't become an internet meme. So
Hmm.
it's the Oscars have always been a weird spot where it's kind of somewhere between like a People's Choice Award and like a Critics Award. And it did, yeah, it used to function as that kind of movie which, like, normal people would watch and consider good, and the critics would also agree on. And I think that's kind of what was great about it, is it was one of the few things that basically everyone of any sort of social standing, whether you're highbrow or lowbrow, would agree that, yeah, Gladiator or Titanic or American Beauty or whatever, is like a good movie. We all enjoy it, and now we really don't have that so much anymore. It looked like the ratings were up a bit with Barbie and Oppenheimer getting nominations, but they'll probably be down again this year because people just don't have a movie to root for, and that does affect the ratings as well, as people tune in to see the movie they like hopefully win awards. And if they're not
Hmm.
passionate about any of the movies, they just won't tune in.
Yeah, I don't know how many people are gonna show up for the 4 hour Brutalist.
Yeah, everything you're saying, Obesegoth, makes sense. I have vivid memories of, as a teenager, every adult in my life seeing and talking extensively about The English Patient, and it being sort of like a phenomenon. And that's like a movie I often think of as like, I guess there are examples of highbrow things that occasionally catch on, and maybe Oppenheimer is an example, but I always just think of The English Patient as like, you have to be like a really different country than we are now for like The English Patient to be something in the zeitgeist that people discuss for weeks and weeks.
The Best Picture often was like a movie that a mom and dad would go see on a date night. Like that was the kind of thing that would get nominated, and it's not so much anymore.
There was actually a Seinfeld episode where Elaine
Yeah,
is
yeah.
driven crazy by everyone around her not shutting up about The English Patient. But yeah, I mean, it those are the movies I remember as kids. Yeah, my parents going to see. They weren't huge cinephiles or something, but they would certainly go to see that. And everybody watched the Best Picture winners and nominees, and it was yeah, one of the few things we could all sort of agree on culturally. And I think some people kind of were fooled into thinking that was coming back with Oppenheimer, but I think this year the box office are going to show that that's not the case. I mean, Anora could break out to, like 50 million or something domestically on like a great day, but I yeah, I think the thing with Oppenheimer is it was less like people were starved for some uh, original big budget movie, and it was more just the phenomenon behind Gentle Minions, where a bunch of teenagers wore suits to go see the Minions 2 movie, but just at a bigger scale. It was a internet meme, and people wanted to feel included in the internet meme and participate in it. And that was it more than anything, because if people really had an appetite for those kind of movies still, I don't think we would have seen the box office results last fall. And this fall we'll see. It's not looking great. Gladiator 2 is kind of selling well, and kind of the word on the street is that Gladiator 2 is actually good. So, I mean, I guess it's possible that if Gladiator 2 is like amazing and makes $1 billion, that maybe Gladiator 2 wins Best Picture this year. And then we have 2 years in a row of kind of these sort of big movies winning. And maybe that signals some sort of return to form, but I really doubt it.
As of right now, your leading pick is Honora, right?
Yeah, it did what Parasite did, which is win it can and then place in the top three at TIFF. TIFF's People's Choice Awards, and what that shows is it appeals to the highbrow, and it appeals to the kind of more populist people going to Toronto Film Festival, and that's a really, to me, a good indicator that you're going to have enough wide appeal to win Best Picture. And I mean, its ratings on Letterboxd are great. I loved it, and given that now they've switched to a preferential voting system, when they've moved to 10 nominees, it benefits you in the voting system to be well liked by everybody, um, as opposed to more divisive. And I think Honora can be that kind of well liked by everybody movie. And yeah, I just don't see much competition for it. Some people would say that sort of the nudity and sex of it might off put voters, but in recent years we've seen, I mean, Shape of Water won. Um, the Poor Things did very, very well. It didn't win, but it looked like it was the runner up to Oppenheimer. And then other movies like Everything Everywhere All at Once won as well. And what that indicates to me is that the Academy, they have been making a push to make it a little younger. And a lot of members of it are also kind of getting more online, the same way you see sometimes like old, kind of say people get online and then they adopt the sort of younger people's political views, and maybe they adopt beliefs about transgenderism or socialism or whatever at age like 50 something. um, I think you see the same thing where you get these Academy voters, they come online and then they start to be influenced by film Twitter. And it was a funny thing. They post in the run up to Oscars, some of the websites, if you follow these things, post anonymous ballots where Academy members submit their ballots to these websites to be posted anonymously. And sometimes they'll add commentary. And there were a couple of these guys who were like, yeah, I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once and I just didn't get it. But then everyone on the internet kept shouting at me that it was great. So I saw it again and I didn't understand it a second time. And I kept hearing that it was great from people on the internet. So I saw it a third time and finally it clicked for me. And it's like, okay, you're getting peer pressured and bullied by like 20-year-olds on film Twitter, and it's affecting your opinions here. So the Academy is getting younger and more influenced by the internet talk. And I don't really see Anora's subject matter hurting it. And I don't see a great competitor to it other than maybe The Brutalist at this time. So we'll see. But yeah, it is a shame that we've kind of lost it as a cultural touchstone, which everybody could kind of agree on.
This we'll get into The Apprentice in a minute, but my one last sort of new movie question: what's the chatter around A Complete Unknown? Because Degree Studies and we went and saw this The Apprentice, and one of the trailers was A Complete Unknown, and I don't think I'd watched a trailer yet, but I leaned over to him. I'm like, it must feel so good to be a boomer, like when you see this movie. Are boomers going to show up for that one? Is it going to do well? It kind of looks. I thought it looked pretty good, at least from just like it's a good looking movie.
Well, music biopics have kind of been one of the only exceptions to the big budget dramas flopping rule, because I think in a way they function like IP because they have a known thing. I mean, like if you're trying to, something like Honora the Brutalist, it's kind of hard to those words mean nothing to people, and you'd have to explain the premise to them. But if it's a movie like Elvis, or the Queen movie, Bohemian Rhapsody, which did incredibly well, uh, people know what it is, and it has that sort of built-in press done for them by fans of them. So Elvis did really well, and this could do similarly. It's probably a little less fun, but it's by James Mangold, who's done. People probably know him from Logan and Ford versus Ferrari. He did the new Indiana Jones, unfortunately, but most of his filmography is pretty good. He's a unadventurous, sort of reliable hand who will give you a competent film.
Yeah, and 20 years ago he did Walk the Line, which sort of it set the
Oh yeah,
sort of model which every music biopic kind of copies now.
yeah.
And
So I mean,
that did well, right? Walk the Line.
I believe it did. It's and I mean, the early word is that like they test screenings was sort of mid, and they did some reshoots. However, the studio also pushed it up from a release in like mid 2025 to 2024. I think it's releasing Christmas or around there, because obviously they sensed weakness in the Oscar field this year.
Mm.
And they looked at it and kind of thought, we can get in for certainly actor. I'd be surprised if Timothy misses. Probably picture, and some tech things too, because it looks like a very sort of expensive, well-made production. I could see it actually doing okay if the reviews are good. The one downside is that everybody seems to be cramming to try and get in before the end of the year. So Christmas is like, there's so many releases on Christmas. There's the Bob Dylan movie, there's Nosferatu, The Brutalist, Baby Girl. Um, I mean, there's got to be a couple of blockbusters, which I'm not even thinking of, because that's a standard. I'm sure there's some family film at that time. So it's going to be pretty crowded. But I could see it doing all right, and I could see the movie being okay. I'm sure it'll be competent.
Yeah, I thought the trailer looked pretty good. I think it'll at least scratch that itch for like a mainstream uh boomer appeal. Okay, let's jump into The Apprentice. So this is, of course, the movie about the rise of Trump. This movie had kind of a crazy road to actually getting on the screen. If I understand it correctly, like it took 5 or 6 years to actually get it written and made, and then what? No one wanted to distribute it, or what exactly happened?
Well, it premiered at Cannes, and the reception at Cannes was positive, but not glowing. And if anything, the criticism seemed to be like that critics didn't didn't think it was enough of a hit piece against him, or was too kind to him. And I think somebody at Cannes, before it even had a distributor pick it up, somehow Trump saw it, or he learned what was in it, and they it could be that the one of the financiers of the film, who's Dan Snyder, who
Yeah.
was an NFL owner, who actually is um, a Trump sort of big donor and friend. I guess he must have been tricked into producing the film or something, or is
Yeah,
just
it
an
was his
idiot.
son-in-law.
Was it?
His son-in-law manages like his like film interests, like his investment into film, and he went to his father-in-law and he's like, let's do this one. And his father-in-law, they apparently looked at the script and said, okay, this sounds fine. But then when he actually saw the portrayal, he objected to how it was actually filmed.
Well, maybe he's just an idiot. I mean, or the script changes. I mean, who knows? But the somehow they learned after Cannes what was in it, and they threatened a lawsuit. I think one of the major complaints was the Ivana rape scene, which we can talk about in a minute. But they threatened this lawsuit, and that seemed to scare off distributors. At least that was the theory, because nobody wanted to pick it up. Eventually, the distributor turned out to be the people that bought it was Briarcliff, which is the most nothing sort of they do like Michael Moore has been releasing new documentaries like consistently, but nobody knows this because they are distributed by Briarcliff and just kind of go into the void. So in August they bought the rights to it, and they started in September a Kickstarter campaign to promote the release. And I saw they raised a couple $100,000. I'm not sure how high it got, but they rushed the release because they wanted to get it out before the election. But so they release it, and the campaigning was a little interesting to me. The campaign initially seemed to be sort of see this movie to own Trump, because this is the movie that Trump didn't want you to see. Now, Trump, after it was picked up by Briarcliff, actually dropped his lawsuit, I think intelligently, because they realized that Briarcliff is a nobody distributor that has no money, and the only press that this film is getting is from our lawsuit against it. So they dropped it. Now, the film and Briarcliff kept running with that as sort of the theme of their marketing. And I saw, Jon Stewart, for example, had a segment of, like Trump is trying to stop you from seeing this movie, so on and so forth. However, in the run up to the release, in the last couple of days, the director actually posted a endorsement from Roger Stone saying that he thought it was like a good depiction of Roy Cohn or something like that. And he said, well, this is actually a apolitical film, and we're just trying to be fair, and I think Trump supporters would like it. My hunch is what happened is they saw the tracking for it and realized that they were headed for disaster, because what ended up happening is they released it this weekend, and it made, I think, about $500,000. The budget for the movie, I think, was $16 million. And my take on the box office, not to get ahead of ourselves here, was that sort of the libs can't really bring themselves to see a movie about this guy that they hate. It's too psychologically disturbing to them to be in the presence of like Satan here, or a guy in a Satan costume
Yeah.
for 2 hours. And actually, Paul Schrader posted on his Facebook a funny reaction where he was like, well, I thought the movie was excellent, but I had to walk out because I just couldn't take seeing Trump for that long. So I think when you have a movie like this, or like Bombshell, the movie about the Fox News host, even if it's sort of a movie with liberal themes, liberals just hate conservatives so much, and it's so agonizing for them to even see them that they won't go see the film. So it's flopped pretty hard right now, and it looks to be kind of dead in the water. We'll see about Oscars. I can talk about that later if we want, but this movie seems to have basically gone nowhere. So that's the rough overview of the story of how it came to theaters.
Okay, yeah, it's been kind of a funny path. Degree studies. You want to jump in? I'm curious. We didn't really talk after the movie. We both kind of had to go our separate ways. Curious what your take is on the movie. Like, what did you think about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do think the movie takes like almost an hour. I mean, I wasn't looking at my phone, but I think if you wanted to go see this movie as like a satisfying villain origin story for Trump, it actually takes like a really long time until they show you him do anything explicitly reprehensible. Like there's a weird theory of the case of Trump's psychology in this movie, which is sort of that he was insecure, unsure of himself, like wanted to be an important man, but maybe wasn't, it had some like, I don't know, ethical basis or something, and wasn't ready to do like the bad things that real estate success required. And then like Roy Cohn had to show him sort of like how you get things done. And so it's almost like for the first half of the movie, the villain is Roy Cohn, and then it sort of flips. Cohn becomes sympathetic in his illness, and Trump is then the more monstrous of the two. But I definitely felt like it took almost an hour, where as someone who likes Trump, like I certainly didn't find the presentation of him in the first hour offensive. I think they were spoon feeding a little bit like things that were supposed to be him getting corrupted or whatever. And I guess I did find myself thinking like it, I said this to you guys before we started recording, but there's a bunch of things that happen that I was just curious, like, is there a book or are there journalist accounts that this is based on? Because while I have heard the story that Roy Cohn was sort of like a consigliere for Trump as his attorney, showing him the ropes of New York politics, I had never heard anyone say that Trump sort of, was like a 30-year-old babe in the woods who never, who didn't know how to realize his ambition, and like Roy Cohn turned him into something else. Like, that's a story that this movie presented that I hadn't heard before. And I sort of think sometimes like the certain like liberal narratives, they do always sort of appeal to insecurity. Like anyone who ends up evil, they'll just be like, well, he wasn't like totally affirmed by his father, and that made him self-conscious, so and now he's the devil or something. And I was sitting there thinking like, do we know this? Are there accounts that say this? And then the other thing I I asked you guys is they show Roy Cohn just like regularly extorting people with, he has private information about them, and in several scenes in the movie, he uses that information to like blackmail public officials to get Trump what he needs to get a building project done. And I hadn't even read like articles that alleged that about, at least not specifically. I mean, I've heard that Roy Cohn was a person who skirted the law, but I had never heard like, oh, Trump got, a tax abasement for the Commodore Hotel because Roy Cohn had compromat on DOJ officials. Like, I'd never heard that, and I've read a little bit about Roy Cohn and Trump. I think so. I sort of, I guess I was a little frustrated, being like, did they just make this up? Like, where are they getting their theory of Trump from? But just on like a movie, judgment, especially the first hour, I really enjoyed. I think Jeremy Strong is an amazing actor, and I don't know, I don't have an image in my head of what Roy Cohn was like. Like, I have seen pictures of him, but I don't know how he acted. But the performance that Jeremy Strong did, I thought was excellent. And I did see the Roger Stone tweet where he said it was something like, as Obesegoth said, it was something like, I knew Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was a friend of mine, and this is an amazing and accurate portrayal of Roy Cohn. So that, and Jeremy Strong is a person who takes his performances very seriously, and puts a lot into his acting. So I really enjoyed watching him, especially early in the movie when he's at the height of his powers. Sebastian Stan's performance, I don't know. I think it's not his fault that sort of the arc of the movie is that he's like a little bit naive and innocent at the start of his career, or at the very least, if not innocent, he doesn't know what he's doing. And like, I find that sort of hard to believe about Trump, but that's sort of a taking issue with the reality of it. But as a movie, I think it works, and the performances are good. I thought the Ivana actress was a little goofy, and her performance was a little goofy, like maybe took me out of the movie a little bit. But I guess it's hard to play like a model with an accent. Like, maybe that doesn't feel like substantial role or something. But I don't know. I thought it was like a competently made film, and some of the performances were very strong. And yeah, probably for the first hour plus, I was like pretty riveted. And afterwards, I was happy to have seen it.
I don't say this. I don't say this because I'm Trump sympathetic, but I do feel like the movie was at its best um when it was friendlier to Trump. Toward the last half just felt like rushed and clumsy, and I don't think that's just because they were starting to be more mean to him. I just think it was that way. Even they I felt like they could have done that last part. They could have been just as mean, but done it a little more craftily. But yeah, I think I agree with basically everything you're saying. Obesegoth, yeah, I'm curious on your take just on it as a movie.
Yeah, it's I had similar things where I was sort of watching and going, well, gee, I feel like if we had confirmed evidence about this, there'd be people in jail, and this seems kind of far fetched. So, I kind of tried to put those things aside and kind of just watch the film. Um, I thought it was an impressive production for the budget. It made it feel like kind of a Scorsese movie or something, despite being on a much smaller budget. It They did the trick of changing the film stocks, or filming on sort of period appropriate devices, or at least mimicking that
Yeah,
in post after, to kind of give the impression of time passing. I assume there was some digital sort of corrections of backgrounds and stuff in New York to make it look more period appropriate, but I thought it did a fairly good job of feeling like a big film on a small budget. Um, I thought Stan was fine. I thought I had similar feelings where I liked the movie better in the first half, where it was at least a little, um, perhaps more ambiguous or even handed. It did feel like for the second half of the film, became a bit of sort of a SNL caricature type. It felt whatever nuance there had been lost. I know he was becoming a villain, but it felt a little over the top, and also the change felt a little sudden and abrupt. It wasn't sort of as much of a gradual thing as I think I would have preferred. Um, but by and large, I thought it was a decent movie. Putting aside the various complaints, I mean, the prosthetics I thought on Stan were fine. They were okay. The They did go a little overboard as he's becoming more evil. They like make his skin like much more splotchy to like sort of a
hmm
cartoonish degree, and I was like, "Come on, guys, this is a bit much." But yeah, it was an impressive production for the budget, and I thought a decent film.
yeah. So regarding Sebastian Stan, I'm wondering what exactly he was going for, and I think my impression was that he decided at some point, or the production as a collective, they decided at some point, don't don't try and do like a Trump impersonation. Just do something that is, because it didn't even really seem. He seemed to look kind of like Trump, but he never really sounded very much like Trump to me. But yeah, which I think was fine. I think they basically just decided like we're gonna get in the ballpark and just go from there. We're not gonna try too hard to get it too close because we'll probably just that would just look goofy. Um, so he kind of works for me, but at the same time, never fully sort of seems like Trump. But it's okay. I mean, I would rather they do that than try too hard.
Well, I think the difficulty is there's so many Trump impressions now that you're not going to have the best.
Yeah,
And if you're just going to compare it, like how close can you get the voice? There's going to be some random people on the internet who are going to do it better than you. So uh, that's not going to do anything. I mean, I think probably the philosophy behind like prosthetic likeness makeup is largely, you want the midpoint between the actor and the subject, because like with the prosthetic makeup you could just cover the subject's face basically in rubber, and then like they wouldn't be able to emote as well, and you'd lose the actor entirely, but they might look a lot like the person they're trying to be. So you want to kind of hit that you can see both at the same time. um, I personally wouldn't nominate this for like a Makeup Academy Award or anything, but I thought it was like okay. And the with the voice too, I think that was kind of the philosophy of we don't want to just have this be a pure Trump impression. We want to Sebastian Stan you to be able to act and sort of display emotions and do your ability, but you can throw in a hint of Trump in there so that when you're watching the film, you can kind of forget about it and just kind of accept that this is Trump, at least during the course of the movie.
Have you guys seen Primary Colors from the '90s with Travolta?
No.
Yes.
So that movie, I was wondering partway through this one, I was wondering if they would have been better off with the Primary Colors approach. So that the premise there is it's basically about Bill Clinton and some of his like affairs, but but the character John Travolta is playing is not Bill Clinton. He's given some other name, and but he has basically a Clinton voice, and everything's basically the same. But they change all the names and change the situations a bit. So I was wondering, should they have just done that? Like, and they would have even saved, I guess, some legal trouble. I don't know if you guys have an opinion on that.
I mean, I think it may have freed them to do a better film because you could take more liberties and make it just sort of a like dramatically more interesting thing about like a real estate developer getting into politics and this kind of thing. But as I said before about the music biopics functioning like okay at the box office, I think at this point it's so hard to sell a traditional drama that just saying, well, it's a drama about a guy kind of loosely inspired by Trump wouldn't be enough to get headlines or any sort of press or awards or anything like that. I think you need to almost have it be, well, it's the Trump movie in the hopes, and now this didn't result in box office, but I think in the hopes of box office.
Yeah, yeah. There's a scenario where see it could have popped off a little better. I don't. Maybe it's. I mean, you talk a lot about there needing to be like a meme or something to attach to a movie to get people to actually care. This movie didn't. It lacked some sort of maybe an iconic trailer or moment or meme or something. I can imagine people showing up for a Trump movie, but yeah, this one wasn't going to be the one.
It needed him saying like, "Go back to the club" or something in a funny voice.
um, and that so one thing that kind of reminds me what they the thing I the thing I liked probably the least about the movie was what I'd call like Forrest Gump core or something. Like they're like, here's these like 30 events or like rumors or things that popular culture associates with Trump, and we're gonna work them in whether you like it or not, or whether it's good for the story or not. Like we're gonna find little ways to like work these little quotes in there or these little references that are now that like every MSNBC watcher they were throwing out these little like fan service tidbits for them. That was probably the worst aspect of it to me. It felt like it was trying too hard to get like the clapping seal or like the guy who nudges the guy who nudges his wife. He's like, oh, he said the thing he said, or they would do these foreshadowings to when he would eventually become president. Like they kept dropping little things like that, like his interview with that lady who's like, maybe you could be president someday or whatever.
I agree that the slogans and the that was a little wink wink moments that were kind
They're
of
like,
stupid.
he's sitting there on his like couch, he's looking fat, and they zoom in like on his Diet Coke, because everyone knows Trump drinks Diet Coke, and Trump famously said that only fat people drink Diet Coke. So it's like, we're gonna do the Diet Coke shot.
I'm actually really surprised they didn't do like anything about like small hands or any of those other like classic Trump kind of
Oh yeah,
things.
or bone spurs, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that showed some real restraint to not do the small hands or bone spurs jokes. Um, let's see. So let's talk about some of the things. Like I think all of us are a little uncertain on where the line was, like on what in this movie is meant to be like historical and what's just based on rumors that they thought I guess they could get away with. Um, like do we know Trump? I mean, I've heard the rumor before that he was like on amphetamines or diet pills, but like, is that like a known thing or is that just sort of a rumor?
The one thing I'll say about that, so I've consistently heard that even before he was a political figure, but the thing I can't square it with is he has all these. After I saw the movie, I was reading about Trump's brother Fred because I
Yeah,
wanted to see like, is there any basis for the idea that like Fred came to him in a time of crisis, and Trump was like in some way, turned him away, and then later, obviously that's sort of like a dramatic thing a movie can insert and just sort of assume that happens in a family life, but he has all these quotes about it is interesting reading about what Trump said about his brother because it is a time you get to see him sort of being like sweet and thoughtful. And he has so much stuff about he's like, yeah, my dad was a teetotaler and that's why I'm a teetotaler, but also the whole time Fred was a drunk, he was like, Don, if I ever see you, drinking or smoking or doing anything, I'm gonna like kick the shit out of you because you're gonna like it too much like me. And he's like, yeah, Fred did a really good job. So that made me think like that probably isn't real. But I do also seem to recall there was a brief time, I don't know what years it would be, but when some of these diet pills came out, like fen, I do think especially for celebrities, doctors were giving them to people and not saying like this is an upper. They were
yeah,
literally just saying like this is something you can take to help with your appetite. So it is possible that someone could end up on them not thinking they were taking a mind altering substance because there was a brief period where they were sort of widely prescribed, and I don't know if perhaps he was just caught up in that, but I have no idea. And I was wondering too, like, did Trump get liposuction? Like, do we know that, or people just like
yeah,
talking about his weight?
I do want to mention because you brought it up. I did take note of, yes, the moment where he turns his brother away, and then also, as far as I know, Trump has said that he's never drunk at all. Um, I mean, he said that on, I think, the Theo Von podcast recently. They show
yeah,
him in the film being pressured into drinking by Roy Cohn, and it did strike me as kind of shitty on the filmmaker's part that like they felt like they couldn't let him have anything. If we let him have the brother thing, he's too sympathetic. If we even let him have the sticking to his principles on the not drinking thing, he's too sympathetic. And they were too afraid of giving him like a single positive trait. And I felt that they undercut their movie a bit in that. And because they felt like they just couldn't bring themselves to do it.
yeah. I was wondering about that too. Is there some famous story about like Roy Cohn pressuring him into drinking at least once? Maybe there is some rumor about that, but I had never heard that. I had heard that he was pretty much a lifelong abstinent from drinking guy. Um, and then yeah, the liposuction. I mean, I wasn't really aware of that one. And then the way they shot it kind of implied that he was getting liposuction instead of going to Roy Cohn's funeral. Is that was that supposed to be what they were saying?
I mean, I think it was just like, I almost interpreted it like a Frankenstein kind of thing.
Yeah,
Like he's kind of being reborn here as like this evil new person, as like Rory Cohn's being left behind. And I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he got liposuction. I mean, he is fat. Like, what do you expect?
yeah, and they also cut open his head. I don't know if that was maybe that was a real thing too. I don't know. I mean, he's obviously been sensitive about his hair forever. So I did not realize until the movie. I looked it up right after. But were you guys aware that he had like this sort of relationship with Warhol?
No.
No, I
So
didn't even know. Like when that happened in the movie, I sort of assumed they just made that up. Is that true that they knew each other?
yeah, so in the movie, I thought it might have just been some Forrest Gump thing where they're like, "Hey, let's just throw another famous New Yorker of the era in on the screen at the same time." But no, they had lots of interactions. Warhol wrote about him in his diary a bunch of times, like met with Trump today. He didn't like the painting I was proposing, or like So I guess in one of the uh, Trump Tower, maybe Warhol was going to do like these 8 paintings, but they went back and forth. Trump kept visiting the studio and was like, "That's not right," and they eventually never did it, and they kind of fell out. But they did have a lot of interactions with each other. Um, yeah, that was something interesting, and then the fact that like Warhol and they really did first meet at Cohn's party. So it's like I don't know the reputation of Warhol, but if you're hanging out with Roy Cohn, um, was Warhol a far right guy or whatever?
Well, I do know Warhol was a very observant Catholic, and this only came out after he died that he would go to mass with his mom all the time.
That was in the diary too. He was like mentioned something like feeling frustrated about an interaction with Trump, and then he's like, "Well, anyway, I'm going to church." In the little diary.
I did think that as somebody who went to a lot of college parties without drinking, that scene was pretty cool. With what was it? What's the band? Is that Suicide or something? Yeah, where he's like at the party that's like getting crazy and he's like not drinking. I really like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, and it's like there's like red. The lights are all red and everything, and there's gay guys everywhere.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of probably your listeners could relate to that feeling.
Yeah. That's true. How did you how did you feel about the scene where he walks on a Roy Cohn in the gay guy room?
Yeah, been there before.
There was there was like 5 or 6 times during the in the theater. There's like 10 people there, and Degree Studies and I are there, and there's like 5 or 6 times where we are laughing and no one else is laughing.
That was
Like,
also I don't know. We didn't talk about this either, granted, but that was a bizarre crowd. Uh, like several people like physically having a hard time, like fitting in their chairs and like getting up 4 or 5 times.
Hey, you guys
yeah,
went to the same screening as me?
yeah, someone like dropped a bunch of stuff or something at
Yeah, did
one
you see
point.
the guy who was coming in and out at the beginning and he kept covering his face with his hands? I had a brief moment where I was like, "Oh, this guy's going to kill us all." But like that's
Oh
cool.
no,
I'll die at the Trump movie.
that would have been so bad. Oh my goodness. Um, yeah, it was a strange crowd. And yeah, and we kept laughing. There's lots of moments where he's like, Trump is just like overtly rude to someone, or Roy Cohn is like says something. He's drops an F slur, which I can't. I'm gonna put this on YouTube, so I can't say it. But um, and we would just like laugh, and I guess everyone thought those parts were not supposed to be funny.
Well, I do think there's things I wonder sometimes about my own derangement. Not that I think I'm wrong about everything, but like you wonder about the ideological and cultural bubble you're in because sometimes when I'm watching these movies, I'm aware of things that I think to the audience are supposed to play as very sinister, but to me it's just sort of like, yeah, whatever. Like one is um I think it's always supposed to really hit in movies when someone who like especially a historical movie, when someone who is a closeted homosexual is using slurs against gay people. But to
Hmm.
me, that's just like eminently understandable. It's like, yes, they lived in a time where people used this word to certain effect. And then the other thing was like the Ethel Rosenberg speech. Like I think when he's saying like, I didn't care that she was a mother, she needed to die. Like I think that's supposed to be a moment where if you're normally socialized, you're like, oh, this Roy Cohn guy has no, uh, he's like really, really evil. But I sort of felt like, yeah, I don't know, like when anyone's up for the death penalty, like is being a parent like a huge part of that? I mean, I'm sure judges do take that into account, but it's definitely not like a get out of execution free card.
Yeah, that exact moment, I'm like, I could tell, like, oh, this is written in here so that we know Cohn is bad, but also I agree with Cone. Sort of the biggest. Okay, here's the biggest kind of moment of the movie, and this is the moment where I think they take the biggest liberty, and it's the rape scene. Now I had heard about, I'd heard about this for a long time, like that Trump committed marital rape or whatever of Ivana, and the depiction in the movie is pretty intense. Like he like grabs her by the neck or the head or whatever and pushes her down and proceeds to do what he does. And it's pretty aggressive. Uh, but then, so I'm thinking like, oh, okay, wow, like this is really bad. Is this actually what she claimed happened? And if you look it up, it's like not really. Like I have the thing. I don't know. Obesegoth, did you find the Wikipedia thing? I have it too, but if you have it, you can.
I was just gonna say too, Granite. It's very rape is about power. Rape is not about sex pilled. Because like it's a bizarre setup. Because the whole thing that
That's
gets
right.
them fighting is he's like, I'm not into you anymore, and then she's like insubordinate, and he's like, well, if you're insubordinate, like then I have to rape you, and it's like this is such a specific way to make this play out. So I was too wondering, like, this scene is so bizarre. Is there like a deposition that's the basis for this? But it sounds like from what you guys were saying that there is not.
Well, I have it. I have it pulled up here, which I can read for you. In a deposition under oath rendered during their divorce proceedings, Ivana accused Donald of rape and of pulling out her hair by the handful when his plastic surgery to alter his hairline failed. Ivana Trump issued a statement clarifying earlier allegations made during her 1989 divorce proceedings. She explained that her use of the term rape was not meant in a literal or criminal sense and was made during a time of high emotion. Ivana stated, quote, Donald and I are the best of friends, and together we have raised 3 children that we love and are very proud of. I have nothing but fondness for Donald, and I wish him the best of luck on his campaign. I have recently read some comments attributed to me from nearly 30 years ago at a very time of high tension during my divorce from Donald. The story is totally without merit. Donald and I are the best of friends, and he would never rape me.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's perfect. I mean, a woman who in a divorce proceeding is like, yeah, he raped me, and then later says, well, he did not rape me in a literal or criminal sense. I saw another quote. I don't have it up, but she basically just says like he was. It's actually a funny quote too. Because she's like, he was normally so gentle and loving and tender when we made love or whatever, but in this one occasion he was abnormally aggressive or something. That's like what she meant, I guess.
This is apropos of nothing here, but while I'm looking at the Wikipedia here, it looks like the Kickstarter for the release of the film was made over $400,000. So when you look at the opening weekend of like $500,000, and you figure half of that's going to the theater, they probably actually made more from their Kickstarter to release the film than from their opening weekend.
So I think Obesegoth, I think I've heard you raise this question as well, or I've heard people ask you, and I think there is a uncertainty about this even like within a lot of industry experts, but like I kind of don't believe it doesn't really seem to track that movies bomb as hard as they do as often as they do. It seems like they're making money somewhere, but they claim they're losing money. I don't know if that's true, but that's my sense of it. Like I feel like this movie's gonna have a long life on on some streaming service or on like what is it, not pay per view but whatever they call it, um, video on demand, VOD. Like I feel like a lot of people are gonna end up seeing this because it is a curiosity. It is I don't know, maybe people were just they weren't gonna go. It's in that space where they're not gonna go to the theater to see it. They don't want people to know that they paid for the Trump movie, or if they want that ejection, that safe ejection seat of streaming where they feel like they can turn it off whenever.
It is kind of crazy to go to a movie that I would say feels quite well made, especially compared to a lot of stuff you see, like made with care. And I think I would even say, from my layperson's perspective, like Jeremy Strong's performance seems Oscar worthy, and then to just be like, oh, it made $500,000. Like, I have a hard time squaring that, but I guess that happens.
Well, I think the movies that tend to do well on VOD are largely the. Let me back up a second. Hollywood accounting is very weird, and it's become even harder to tell what's going on in the day of streaming because um, Hollywood studios are always trying to claim that their movies are not making money because they don't want to pay residuals and whatnot to the various people who worked on it. Now, movie profits were a bit more black and white back in the day because it's there was movie tickets and then maybe DVD sales. Now with streaming, it's a little weirder because a lot of these companies have their own sort of deals set up. Warner Brothers has Max and whatnot. Paramount's got Paramount Plus and so on and so forth. And it's probably hard to tell really how much good a movie is doing or how much money it's bringing in if it's just getting people to sort of hold on to their subscriptions. Now, Briarcliff does not have, as far as I know, any deal with any streamer, so it would pretty much just be VOD. Now, for VOD, the same movies that do well on VOD are largely the movies that do well at the box office. The idea that, like, there's this difference between a theater movie and a streaming movie, from what I've seen, is largely not like a myth. It's not that like people see certain movies and are just kind of like, well, that seems like something more to watch on my TV. No, they go see the Batman and then they also rent the Batman on their television. It may be a little more even, but it's not like some night and day thing. So given that libs have shown like a real hesitance to go see a movie that they regarded as like, it's just like psychologically stressful, maybe there's a little bit less, as you said, like, it's easier for them to shut it off and they don't have to walk out of the theater, or, if they're feeling overwhelmed or too triggered or something, they can just pause it and go take a walk and then come back. And the idea of being stuck in a theater with no pause button and Donald Trump is maybe too hard for them.
Donald Trump is raping on camera, on scene. He's raping.
Yeah, so it might do a little bit better, but I think if you're, I mean, it could be, I mean, somebody's eating it. I'm not sure how much Briarcliff paid for the rights. So it could be that the people who produced the film already have sort of eaten shit on the distribution deal, and Briarcliff paid nothing for it, so they're happy. But if you're making $500,000 on a $16 million thing, and as I said, that $500,000 is not even entirely your money because some of that's the theater's money. You're not doing well. So I don't think there's a real happy result or path to a financially good situation here.
So I don't totally know how it works. So Briar, whatever it's called, Briarcliff Patch, whatever, they don't have a standing agreement with any streamer. So like there's no their movies don't automatically go over to like Netflix or Prime or something. But they could just license this movie to any streamer that wanted to pay them, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you sometimes see, like, for example, movies from all over on Netflix that aren't produced by Netflix because Netflix only started to exist recently. So they're just sort of acquiring the temporary streaming rights for various films. So, you can reach agreements like that. Now it's becoming more and more that each streamer is sort of, producing their own content. But yeah, there's still like, sort of rights that can be sold.
Yeah, my sense for this one, my sense is that people, I guess they wouldn't pay the VOD rental or whatever. But I kind of think if it was just on their Netflix screen or on their Amazon Prime Video screen, it's just sitting there, like, I think people would click it. and maybe that doesn't like make them the money or whatever, but I do. My suspicion is that this will have some like cultural staying power. I guess maybe not a big thing or whatever, but it will stick around, and quite a few people will eventually see it. I think there's a lot of. I mean, maybe this is just sort of a niche. Maybe this is only of interest to like our corner of Twitter, which I will say is a very outsized has an outsized influence, I think, on like internet culture. But um, I think there's a lot of like meme material and clip material from this that someone could slice it up and get a lot of internet traction with it.
And Obesegoth, I have a question. So you sort of said like the idea that there are movies that totally bomb in the theater but do well on VOD is like a little bit of a myth. Do you think that's different than I remember when we were growing up, there would be a thing where people would say, "Oh, this movie didn't do well in the theaters, but like people are renting it a lot. Like it's doing well at Blockbuster or DVD sales are good." And like it did seem like I seem to remember there are at least a couple movies
I think
that like the
Fight Club was one of those. I think.
yes. So
Hellboy.
do you think it's like something about VOD is that relationship has changed somehow?
Um, I mean, I'm not going to say that there's no movies that don't do well, and I mean, some movies like a movie like Saltburn um,
Hmm.
really took off once it did nothing in theaters, and then once it was on, I think Amazon Prime, it kind of became a TikTok thing, and then it really took off. So what happens, and I've heard that like the Northman did pretty well on VOD and stuff, but it's if you look at charts and from what I've heard of people looking at them, it's not the huge thing that you'd expect, and sometimes I see people you know, uh, commenting in like the box office subreddit or something, kind of say, "Oh, well, that's a streaming movie to me, or that's a VOD. That's not a theater movie." So I'm sure it's doing okay on VOD, and it's kind of like, well, the movies that do best on VOD are the ones that do best at the theater. It may do a little bit better, but it's not like it's some totally unrelated, uh, inverse kind of list here. Um, I do think that I mean, DVDs were more expensive. VOD, I mean, some people pay the 20, but a lot of people will just wait and do the $2.99, $3.99 kind of rental. I think that's much more common.
Hmm.
Um, and DVDs were like $20 for and from what I understood, sold a pretty huge amount. So I think it's largely a price thing is the major difference, and then a fair number of people won't even do VOD. They'll just wait until it's streaming, and then it's of course you're getting some fraction of a streaming subscription.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do recall just going back to I don't know, maybe this is boring, but going back to the accounting thing, I do remember I went to college in Southern California and took some film class, and they had a producer come talk to us. This is like 20 years ago now, but he did say something where he said like the public discourse about movies making money and their budgets was like totally fake. He basically said at that time that like not all distribution costs and basically no advertising costs were factored into like the public budget of a movie. So his point was just that like often when people say a movie's made its money back, like they'll be like, "Oh, it cost 80 million and they've made 100 million, so they're already in the profit." He would say like there's stuff you don't see and a number that isn't reported that's likely as much as double of the original budget. So like it is not the case that if a movie, is clearing its reported budget by 10 or 20 million that it is in fact profitable. And he's like often we have to get like a much larger margin than the public discourse would lead you to believe. So I remembered that conversation, but I didn't know if this was a pre-streaming even conversation. And it sounds like from what you were saying that like the financial stuff is even more complex now.
Yeah, the number that I used to hear thrown around was like 2.5. Um,
Hmm.
That was kind of back in the day, though, um, because it's not just the cost of the finance. It's also the marketing. Marketing a lot of times can be as much as the cost of the production. I mean, I know for Oppenheimer, for example, that was $100 million movie with $100 million marketing. That was just in the contract. It's what they guaranteed Nolan. But then additionally, on top of that, there's so marketing can vary depending on the film. The movie chains themselves take a fraction of the ticket sale. I think in the U.S. it's about half. I think in overseas markets it's a little less than that. So you need to do substantially better than your production budget, to be making a profit. But again, there's differences here where the cost can be eaten by different people, right? Because if, let's say, I am independently making a movie for $50 million, I can't find anybody to buy it other than somebody for 10 million. Well, now if they make 20, 30 million on it, they profit, but I've already eaten my shit by selling my $50 million movie for 10. um, Now there is some weirdness where I kind of feel like some of the digital stuff is more profitable than I think, because I just get these feelings sometimes, because like these weird ass movies get sequels, like, and I'm like, you're making a sequel to The Accountant starring Ben Affleck or whatever.
Yeah.
Really? Like, okay, well then I guess that movie was better, did better than I thought. Um, so it's become really hard to tell, and really difficult these days. But I feel pretty safe in saying that this movie is not doing well, given if it had opened to 5 million or
Right, and like everywhere I've ever worked, there is an incentive to act like what you're doing is profitable even if it's not. And the places I've worked have much less sophisticated PR. Like obviously you can sort of reverse engineer this from decisions, like as you sort of implied, like if there are sequels then someone must be making money, because like you wouldn't just bullshit your way into a sequel. But I do think like I've I've certainly worked on projects where I think the internal feeling was that money was lost, but like all the external comms was like, yeah, yeah, we did okay on this. And so I wouldn't know like from the outside how you would parse that.
yeah, it's hard, but yeah, it's based on from what I've seen of other movies, as I said about these figures. My gut instinct is that it's doing poorly, and I can kind of see why. I did kind of think about, while I was sitting there, I wonder how well like a Barack Obama biopic would do. A very positive one. And I also thought about the David Mamet is writing a Hunter Biden movie. I think
Let's
though
go.
it's taking the approach of like a as you guys had referred to earlier, of a character very obviously inspired, the son of a president, kind of thing. Um, but I am kind of curious if conservatives will. I don't think they will. Display the same sort of attitudes of like, we hate being around these people. I think conservatives don't feel that same um, sort of revulsion towards liberals. I mean, I think they'd happily hate watch something, although their movie going habits are just different. Where I don't think conservatives are going to go see like a serious drama film. I just because they're in general sort of lower brow. So that
So
might.
this would be the second Hunter Biden movie. Remember My Son Hunter,
No, I
which I
don't.
I didn't see it. It was by some small like conservative sort of studio or something. It looked funny. The trailers looked really funny, but yeah, My Son Hunter from 2022.
Oh man, I'll have to check that out. I
Yeah,
was
but
not
good.
aware that that was a thing.
Yeah, good to see we're getting a Hunter Biden cinematic universe. Um, Okay, we can wrap it up there. I mean, you guys have anything else you want to bring up?
I would just say, I mean, I think what we've said in general already implies this, but I think it's definitely worth seeing. Um,
I think there's a lot of fun to be had with this movie. I think uh I mean, I would like for more guys like that. More of my friends online to see it because I think there's some fun stuff to talk about, and then but then I look forward to people pulling clips from it too. I think there's going to be some fun uses of this movie.
Yeah, I'm always kind of hesitant to. It seems like a lot of people online in our sphere of Twitter are like more hesitant to watch something with like liberal sensibilities than we are. So I'm not sure how they'd take it, but I did find it to be an enjoyable movie, and it moves along at a pretty good pace, and is basically well made, and feels like a big movie. So I I didn't uh, I didn't hate it. I had a decent time watching it.
Lots of it is pretty funny, and I mean, maybe some of those parts you weren't supposed to laugh at, but they're funny either way. It's just I think a lot of people will like it, sort of at least not, I don't want to say ironically, but at least sort of knowingly. There's a knowing sense of like this isn't for me, but it's still kind of fun.
Yeah, so go see it if you're listening.
Yeah, and remember, always attack, never admit wrongdoing, and always claim victory.
so true.
Came up with that myself. My mentor, who died of AIDS, did not give me that advice.
Yeah, you came up with it because you have a killer instinct.
Yes, I'm a killer. It's genetic. All right. Special thanks to Obesegoth for joining. Go request to follow him. He may approve your follow. Who knows?
Yeah, good luck.
All right.
Thanks,
Later,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.